No one was there when Holly exhaled her last breath, except for Courtney. The clock read 6:42 a.m. in room 408 of St. Mary's Hospital. The heart monitor beeped one final time before falling silent. And the nurse entered with quick steps but a resigned expression. They had known this day would come. Courtney held her mother-in-law's hand with both of hers, as if that could delay the inevitable. Outside, the hallway was deserted. Neither Travis, Holly's son, nor Stella, her daughter, showed up. No calls, no messages, nothing. Holly died looking at the only person who had stayed by her side until the end. And although Courtney didn't share her blood, she carried a loyalty that her own children never showed. When Courtney returned home that afternoon, she did so in complete silence, no radio, no tears, moving with a stiffness born of exhaustion. She had spent the entire day signing documents, speaking with the hospital, contacting the few friends still listed in Holly's yellowed address book. Travis hadn't answered any of her calls. Stella hadn't even read the messages Courtney had sent the night before. Everything she had done that day, from announcing the death to choosing the casket, she had done alone. When she arrived, she found the envelope. It was at the bottom of the bag she had taken to the hospital for weeks. It was beige, the edges slightly worn, and her name was handwritten on it. Taped to it, an old key. Inside, a single folded page with a phrase written by Holly in shaky but clear letters. "They never loved me. Now they'll know what it means to be forgotten." Courtney spent hours staring at that key. It was small, made of dark iron, and had a peculiar shape like the ones used in old houses. There was no address on the envelope, but on the back of the letter, in a tighter handwriting, Holly had written, "Brook Pine Chalet, 17B, at the end of the gravel path, behind the lake." Courtney didn't know that place, but when she searched for it on her phone's GPS, she found it was just over an hour away, in a wooded area where she didn't recall Holly owning any property. She decided to go the next day, without telling anyone. She owed no explanations to Travis, not after everything he had done or failed to do. In recent weeks, when she arrived at the location, the first thing she felt was a mixture of surprise and sadness. The chalet was surrounded by tall trees, their dry branches creaking in the wind. It looked abandoned, but not in ruins. It was more like a forgotten place, as if someone had left it behind without wanting to look back. The key fit effortlessly into the rusted lock. Inside, the air smelled of old wood, dust, and something harder to describe. Perhaps memories. Everything looked as though Holly had been there not long ago. A blanket folded on a chair, a teapot still on the stove, framed photographs hanging on the wall. Courtney felt a lump in her throat. This place wasn't just a secret, it was a refuge. A piece of life Holly had kept hidden from everyone. On one of the living room shelves, Courtney found a wooden box with a broken lock. Inside were several hardcover notebooks, some yellowed with time. They were diaries, all written by Holly. The first began in 1987, and the last had entries from just a few weeks ago. Courtney sat in the armchair with the blanket over her legs and began to read. The first pages spoke of a young woman, full of dreams, but already trapped in a distant relationship with a cold and absent husband. As the years went by, the children grew up, and so did the indifference. Travis was described as a spoiled, selfish boy who learned early on to manipulate with silence and contempt. Stella, on the other hand, oscillated between the need for approval and a veiled disdain for anything that didn't bring her immediate benefit. Each page hit like a blunt blow. Holly had written with Claritino embellishments, no victimhood. She documented birthdays when no one called, Christmases where she cooked alone, illnesses during which they pretended to be too busy to take her to the doctor. The hardest to read was a paragraph from 2019, where she confessed to having considered faking a fall just to see if anyone would show up. "I didn't do it. I don't even want to be cared for anymore. I just want someone to see me," she had written. Courtney closed the diary for a moment, her hands trembling. Then she understood why Holly had chosen her, not just to be there in her final days, but to carry forward something the others would never comprehend: the value of silent presence, of loyalty that asks for nothing in return. In the back room, behind a thick curtain that let in only a sliver of light, Courtney found another box, this one containing more formal documents. Deeds, certificates, investment papers, and a sealed envelope with the name of a lawyer, Margaret Keller. The envelope read, "Open only in legal presence." Courtney didn't hesitate. She called the number listed on one of the pages and, to her surprise, the secretary was already expecting her call. "Mrs. Holly left clear instructions for you to contact us as soon as you received that documentation," she said with a neutral yet firm tone. The appointment was scheduled for the following Friday. In the meantime, Courtney returned to the chalet several times that week, organizing things, cleaning carefully, reading more fragments from the diaries that felt as if they had been written in dried blood each. One more, painful than the last. When the day of the appointment with the lawyer arrived, Courtney showed up on time at the office. It was a discreet building with no flashy signs, and Margaret Keller greeted her with a seriousness that foreshadowed what was to come. She asked Courtney to sit down, closed the door, and pulled out a thick folder bearing Holly's full name. What I'm about to read to you was prepared with extreme care. Your mother-in-law wanted to ensure there would be no room for doubt or dispute. Courtney said nothing. She listened to every word with her heart in her throat. Holly had left detailed instructions. Travis would receive only the forgiveness he never deserved, and Stella a simple family ring as a symbol of a relationship she had felt broken for decades. Everything else, properties, accounts, investments, insurance, was to go to Courtney. There were audios, videos, and psychiatric evaluations proving that Holly was completely lucid when she made these decisions. Courtney didn't know how to react as she left the office. It wasn't just the shock of the inheritance, it was the responsibility that came with it. She couldn't stop thinking about Travis's face when he received the news. She knew he wouldn't take being excluded lightly, and she was right. That same night, he came home with fire in his eyes, accusing her of manipulating his mother. He shouted, demanded explanations, hurled insults as if they were truths. Courtney didn't respond. She simply handed him a copy of the will and locked herself in the bedroom. She cried not out of sadness, but out of exhaustion. She had given years of her life to a relationship that was now crumbling in screams and threats. What Travis didn't know was that Holly had anticipated everything. Every verbal attack, every attempt to discredit Courtney, had already been foreseen and documented by his own mother. A few days later, Stella filed a legal challenge to annul the will. She claimed Holly had been influenced by Courtney in her final days and was not of sound mind, but at the first hearing, Courtney's lawyer presented all the files Holly had left, recordings in which she spoke clearly about her decisions, medical exams confirming her mental capacity, and even phone records where she repeatedly asked her children to visit, without response. The judge quickly dismissed the case. Stella left the courtroom with eyes full of rage and her reputation in ruins. Within weeks, she lost her job and began facing serious financial difficulties. Travis, on the other hand, tried a different tactic. He reappeared with a sweet, almost servile attitude, offering cheap flowers and empty speeches. One afternoon, Travis showed up at the park where he had proposed to Courtney years earlier. He carried a small box in his hands and a smile that barely concealed his desperation. He said he had found one of Holly's pieces of jewelry and wanted to give it to her as a symbol of a new beginning. Courtney opened the box. Inside was a ring, but it wasn't Holly's. It was a poorly made replica with a glass stone. She said nothing at first. She looked at him calmly, thanked him, and then pulled an envelope from her bag. Inside were the signed divorce papers. "This is a symbol of closure," she said without raising her voice. Travis didn't argue. He left without saying goodbye. That was the last time they saw each other face to face. After that, Courtney breathed differently, as if she could finally fill her lungs without feeling crushed from within. She spent the following days reorganizing her life, putting her thoughts and emotions in order. She returned to the chalet several times and, little by little, began to see it with new eyes. It was no longer just a place of secrets and pain. Now it had the potential to become something more. That's when the idea was born. Holly had spent her old age marked by abandonment. Courtney knew she wasn't the only one. She began to think about how she could transform that place into something useful, something that would truly honor the memory of the woman who had treated her more humanely than her own in-laws ever did. In less than 3 months, the old chalet became the most important project of her life. Courtney restored it with her own resources, hiring local workers and carefully recovering furniture, photographs, and items that Holly had preserved with such care. She named it Holly's Haven, a community space dedicated to elderly people facing abandonment, grief, or loneliness. The first event was an open dinner that gathered more than 20 people from the neighborhood, most of them widows or older adults with no close family. Courtney cooked herself, served each plate with a genuine smile, and listened attentively to every story. It wasn't charity, it was connection. And in that connection, she found purpose. Little by little, Holly's Haven became a point of reference. Writing workshops were offered, grief support groups, afternoon teas with live music, and even small legal advice services for those facing family disputes. Courtney became more than the forgotten widow of a broken family. She became a community leader, a strong voice against abandonment and emotional neglect. That was when she decided to write. She titled her book The Letter That Freed Me, in honor of that crumpled envelope that changed the course of her life. The book went viral. People from all over wrote to her saying they too had felt invisible, discarded, forgotten. Holly had died, yes, but she had left behind a legacy that not even her own children could erase. The publication of the book caught the attention of local media and then national ones. Courtney began receiving invitations to speak at universities, foundations, community centers. Her story wasn't just that of a woman betrayed by those around her. It was the story of millions who had been relegated to silence within their own families. In every talk, Courtney read a fragment from Holly's diary, the one where she had written, "If anyone ever remembers me, I hope it's not for what I had to endure, but for what I managed to inspire without even realizing it." Those words always ended with standing ovations. But more than the recognition, what mattered to Courtney was seeing people cry, nod, and hug at the end of each event. She knew something was shifting. Meanwhile, Travis and Stella vanished from the public eye. Word got out that Travis had sold his car, quit his job, and moved into a small apartment on the outskirts. Stella was facing fraud charges at a company where she had forged internal documents. Neither of them tried to contact Courtney again. The weight of their own actions had started to catch up with them, slowly, like an inevitable consequence. The irony was that both began to experience exactly what Holly had anticipated in her final note: oblivion. Friends pulling away, doors not opening, birthdays spent alone. Life, in its own way, was teaching them what it feels like to be left behind when you need company the most. Courtney never took pleasure in others' suffering, but she didn't feel guilty either. She had done everything possible to maintain a bond, to preserve respect within a family that had never truly accepted her as one of their own. Now, for the first time, she felt she had her own identity. She was no longer Travis's wife or Holly's daughter-in-law. She was Courtney Walsh, founder of Holly's Haven, writer, a free woman. She began to make space for herself, something she had never done before. Short trips, coastal walks, afternoons in bookstores where she would spend hours without looking at the time. It was as if, only now, she was beginning to fully inhabit her own life, unafraid to take up space, unafraid to exist. The chalet remained full of life. The walls that had once echoed abandonment now resonated with laughter, stories, and songs. There was a special wall where Courtney hung photos of frequent visitors with their names embroidered on small fabric tags. In the center, she placed a picture of Holly smiling, taken during one of the few lunches the two of them had shared alone. Below it, a handwritten phrase read, "Thank you for not leaving me alone. Now there are more of us." That corner became sacred to many. Courtney didn't need to explain what it meant. You only had to see how people paused there in silence, as if they understood they were honoring someone who, even in absence, continued to sow humanity. As the months went by, Courtney began receiving letters from elderly people who had read her book and felt that, at last, someone had spoken out loud what they had been silently carrying for years. Some wrote that their children hadn't visited them in years. Others, that their caregivers treated them with indifference or that they simply felt invisible to the world. Courtney responded to each letter with care. She didn't use generic replies, nor did she delegate to assistants. To her, every story was unique and deserved to be heard with the same attention she had given to Holly's diaries. The empathy she had developed wasn't something new, but now it had a clear direction, a cause. In an interview for a magazine, she was asked what she had felt when she received the inheritance and was rejected by her own husband. Courtney paused for a few seconds before replying, "I felt that. Finally, someone saw me." That someone said, "You matter." It wasn't a polished or strategic answer. It was honest. That phrase went viral, appearing on social media, posters, even street murals. "You matter" became the unofficial motto of Holly's Haven, and also a kind of rallying cry for those who, like Courtney, had lived too long in the background. No one expected a quiet, sidelined, forgotten woman to become a voice for so many. But that's exactly what happened. 1 year after Harley's death, Courtney organized a special event at the chalet to commemorate her life. She didn't call it a tribute or a mass or a ceremony. She called it Full Table. And the only requirement to attend was to bring a story about someone who had marked your life, even if they were no longer around. The main room filled with people carrying portraits, letters, journals, simple objects loaded with memories. There was no script. Anyone could speak when they felt moved to, sharing from the heart. Courtney was the last to speak. She showed the original envelope with the letter and the key and read aloud the sentence that had started it all. Some people cried, others simply closed their eyes. But everyone, without exception, understood that what they had experienced that day was something deeper than a symbolic act. It was a reclamation of the forgotten. After the event, many stayed behind to clean up, tidy the space, as if they didn't want the day to end. A woman in her 70s approached Courtney and said, "Your mother-in-law was right. Sometimes it's not blood that saves you, it's the gaze of the one who stays." Courtney didn't know what to say. She simply hugged her. And in that gesture, she felt something that was no longer sadness or anger or nostalgia. It was gratitude. Not for everything that had happened, but for having had the courage not to look away. For holding that hand in the hospital, for opening that envelope, for taking a broken story and turning it into a support network that now touched lives far beyond her own. What impressed those who knew the full story the most was how Courtney had managed to rebuild herself without revenge or scandal. She never publicly responded to Stella's accusations. She never exposed the most painful details of her marriage to Travis. She simply let the facts speak for themselves. Sometimes, when the press tried to dig up more scandalous details, she would calmly say, "I'm not here to talk about them. I'm here for those who are still waiting for someone to ask how they're doing." That sentence, spoken with serenity and without bitterness, disarmed any attempt at sensationalism. Because the truth was, Courtney no longer lived to repair her past. She lived to illuminate the present of others. In private, she still had difficult days. There were nights when the silence in the house was so deep it hurt. Sometimes she dreamed of the hospital of Holly's hand in hers, of the beeping monitor fading slowly. But she no longer woke up afraid. She would get up, make herself tea, look out the window of the chalet and think, "I'm not alone." Because she wasn't. Holly's Haven kept growing. New volunteers arrived every week. Young people offered classes, workshops, even tech support for the elderly. What was born from abandonment had now become a home for many. And that, Courtney thought, was the closest thing to real love she had ever known. One day, Courtney received a handwritten letter with no return address. Upon opening it, she recognized the handwriting after just the first few lines. Was from Travis. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't try to justify anything. He simply wrote that he had read the book, that he had seen it in an airport bookstore, and that, for the first time, he understood what it meant to be an absent son. He said he didn't want anything, didn't expect a response, but felt the need to write. Courtney read the letter calmly. She didn't cry, nor did she feel liberated. She simply understood that Travis, too, in his own distorted way, was facing his own. Reflection, she didn't reply. She placed the letter in a box along with Holly's diaries, not out of nostalgia, but as a record that even the blindest people might one day try to open their eyes. On the second anniversary of Holly's death, Courtney wrote a special post for the Holly's Haven website. It wasn't a solemn tribute, but a simple, honest reflection. "Thank you for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. Thank you for showing me that some silences speak louder than any scream. Won't let you down." The post was flooded with comments from people who had never met her in person, but who felt that her story had given them the courage to make decisions, leave toxic relationships, or simply talk to their parents before it was too late. Courtney didn't seek to be an example. She just wanted to be useful. And in that desire, she found something she never thought she would: peace. Over time, Holly's Haven began collaborating with other organizations, expanding its model to other cities. What had started as a small center in a forgotten chalet was now inspiring projects across different states. Courtney traveled less, but every time she visited a new location and saw elderly people smiling, participating, being heard, she felt that life was giving her back something she had never known she deserved. Meaning, she never wanted children, but in those faces, she found a different form of motherhood, a presence that nurtured, protected, embraced. The inheritance Holly had left her went far beyond the material. It was an emotional responsibility she had unknowingly accepted the day she stayed in that hospital room when no one else was willing to. In an intimate talk with a group of young volunteers, one of them asked if she regretted anything. Courtney thought for a few seconds before answering, "Yes, I regret not leaving that house, that marriage, sooner. I regret staying silent for so long, accepting crumbs as if they were love. But I also understand that without that path, I never would have gotten here. So regret doesn't stop me. It reminds me of who I was, so I never become her again." The young women looked at her in silence with respect, but also admiration. Courtney didn't see herself as strong, just as someone who got tired of feeling invisible and who one day, finally, decided to open a letter and never again close herself off.